this story caught my attention because when the COVID epidemic was happening in late December of 2019 and early 2020, I, for work, was vaccinating. They were sending myself and a group to go vaccinate long-term care facility patients, and mostly these were elderly, very, very old people. And so we went from facility to facility vaccinating these elderly patients. And this story, our main protagonist is a nurse at one of these long-term care facilities, which I thought was pretty neat because it really throws me back to late 2019, early 2020. And I can kind of put myself in her situation. Now, our main character, Lainey, she just got out of prison, lands a job as a nurse at this facility. She did time at M. Vale. And as she's working, she starts realizing that some of these elderly women, there's something off about them. And it sends goosebumps up my arms, back of my neck, you name it. Dawson's was a bleak place overall, worse than M. Vale's infirmary by far, and that was saying something. Didn't help that they were sticking to no family visits, all the staff went double masked, hair netted and gloved up like they were treating Ebola, smiles hid behind face shields we had to disinfect 30 times a day. Some nurses wore those clear plastic glasses underneath, like dental hygienists, janitors, and us newbies. We mainly got by with dollar store swim goggles and wraparound sunglasses, if that. Nobody wanted to get too close on either side. Auntie Fee was fast asleep when I came in her room the first time. They took her wig off and hid it somewhere, her face gone all white and slack under a mess of baby fine hair. Had to take her pulse and study her breath a while to convince myself she wasn't dead already. Eventually, she cracked one eye open. "Hello, ma'am," I said at last. "I'm new around here. Thought we should probably get acquainted. My name is..." She stirred and snuffled a bit, grimaced, then went off in a surprised coughing fit once she recognized my voice. "Lainey, child, that you?" she managed. Finally, "Gal, I thought you still had 6 months to go. Last I checked. What all you doing up in here, for Christ's own sake?" At that, I gave a quick look around, just in case anybody else might be bothered to listen in. "Well, now," I told her quietly, "Jesus can look after himself, if the Bible's anything to go by. Bad bitches like us, though, times like this, we got no choice but to look after each other." That got her eyes all bright again. Thank God, even under those too thin, bleared up lids. "You go on and speak for yourself, Elaine Ann Mary May," she hissed at me, "and wash your damn mouth out too, while you're at it." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, smiling under my mask. One thing a job like mine teaches is that people say all sorts of things when they're dying. It's like the process breaks something open inside them, some long-buried infectious reservoir, a quick-draining sick pocket. They don't even have to know what's happening, let alone accept it. Might still be entirely convinced they'll survive, but it doesn't matter. A sort of punch drunkenness takes over when it comes home that the walls around them are probably the ones they're gonna die inside. Not despair exactly, just a kind of stillness, a waiting. The ones without the look They were either new or checked out completely. Dementia, psychosis, amnesia, catatonia. Mrs. Camp wasn't any of that, though. Whether it said on her chart, didn't know what she had going on inside her either, any more than what she might have done to make her teeth so red, but it made me shiver. The night nurse, Kevon, said she liked to tuck cutlery up her sleeve and sneak it back up to her room, which was creepy, even if she never cut anybody with it but herself. For all her bag of bone gauntness, she moved on her own, not fast but steady. Never needed hearing aids or glasses either. Sometimes I saw her whispering to other residents, right close up in the ear. One day I had to take her back to her room when I saw the lady she'd been talking to was crying. But Mrs. Camp wouldn't tell what she'd been saying, and the other one just blubbered, lying how she couldn't remember. One way or the other, that same lady died a day or so later, which wasn't exactly a surprise. Didn't like how Mrs. Camp grinned as they wheeled her body past, though. About a week later, I swapped shifts with Kevon because his boyfriend was sick of him only ever meeting up over breakfast. Not like I had anybody at home, and besides, I sort of wanted to know what went on at Dawson's every night, especially in Mrs. Camp's room. That bitch is an odd with a capital O, Kevon agreed, when I asked him how she seemed from his angle. You know she cuts herself, right? All over. Where she think nobody's gonna see. Yeah, Vaughn, I know. With the cutlery. Okay, sure. But did I tell you what she cuts on herself? I shook my head, folding another towel. Looks like words, but not in any language I ever saw. No, seriously. Took a snap while she was asleep one time. Ran it through a bunch of translation apps. This shit ain't even Cyrillic, sis. What's it look like? Arabic, maybe? With a little pinion thrown in on top? But like if worms wrote it underneath a tree's bark or some shit. And you know, I know what I'm talking about. So don't give me that stink eye either. Yeah, you higher education having motherfucker you. He struck a pose like he was rolling his languages degree out for all and sundry to admire. After which we both smirked at each other, high-fived, blew each other a kiss and got the fuck back to work. Soon enough, I was walking in on Mrs. Camp herself. I knew she'd seen me. Caught the eye flicker, even if she didn't react as I went through the routine spiel. How are we today? Time for your sponge bath. And the rest. I was the one lost my place, shocked still, when I slid her robe down her shoulders. On her front, from breastbone to waist, and all down both arms, not to mention the tops of her thighs and inside both her legs, a skin was scarred, etched with signs like Vives or alchemy, all woven together in a sagging web, some red, some pink, some white as sin. Must have taken her all life to make. And looking at it, maybe it was the way the wrinkles bent those scars out of shape, but just for a second, the hole it made my guts twist. And my head hurt. Then she looked over her shoulders at me and grinned, like she was ready to bite a chunk out of my arm right there. don't mind admitting it, I jumped. She laughed. Be careful when you put your hand under the pillow, dear, she told me, like it was a secret. For the first time I heard her accent. Kiwi, maybe, or Southern African. Sometimes there are things under there, and they might not always let you go. The fuck, I thought. But thanks for the warning, ma'am, was all I replied. To which she simply chuckled, then looked away as I sponged her down, stripped the mattress, checked for night sweat and other fluids. No need to clean the rubber covers, thank God. Kivon was good about that, not like some, but I still had to check, which meant steering her to a chair while the air finished drying her, which was harder than it's been a minute ago. I couldn't get my hands near her without the skin on my arms trying to yank itself away. It got a bit easier once I'd helped her dress, and she didn't look at me again either, which also helped. So I sighed to myself slightly when it was all done. Almost made it out the door too before I heard her mutter something. Sorry, Mrs. C, what's that? I said, you and Miss Fiona over there having a bit of a bond there. Don't you? She nodded towards Fee's room, thin lips twitching. Oh, not by blood, I mean. Can't smell that on you. Not quite. But something, nevertheless. That grin blooming back out, even as I tried my best not to look. A certain care on both sides. It's very sweet, would be the word, I suppose. Think you got me confused, ma'am. Maybe it's just because Miss Fiona and me were from the same stock. Why, what a way to put it, Nurse Mary May. Sounds positively archaic. Not sure what all you mean by that, ma'am. Really? You surprise me. High-nosed, gutter-minded bitch. I couldn't stop myself from shaping back inside my jaws, where nobody should have been able to see or hear it. Her head whipped around, though, like I'd said it out loud, and she just smiled the more, till I felt like I was going to puke with it. Vinegar in my eyes, prickling at them. Vinegar in my nose, making it itch, making me want to sneeze and retch at the same time. Shouldn't have been able to smell her breath, but I could. It was rank with meat and peat. Dead vegetable matter, a bog stink, hot like a breeze from hell. And then she looked away, suddenly, blinking at the window. The way people do, they got what she's got. They disconnect. Needle skips in the brain, and they're somewhere else. Some when. Suboptimal conditions, she said, abruptly, scowling up at the dark sky outside. Oh, I should have prepared better. Why is there never enough time? Since I didn't think she even knew I was here anymore, I could pretend like I hadn't heard. Never any good answer to that question anyway. Last time I ever saw her, alive. But not the last time I ever saw her. It shouldn't have been me who found her. Would have been. Wouldn't have been. Kevon's man at home hadn't gotten a positive test result that sent Vaughn off to line up for most of the day before to get his ass tested. But he did, and whoever covered Vaughn's shift did the usual half-assed job. I was just knocking on Mrs. Camp's door and moving on when nobody answered. Between paramedic training and MVale, I've seen my share of shit people can do to each other, and I can handle it, mostly. That room, though, that night, is the only thing that's showed up in my nightmares since. I remember walking in, flipping the light and thinking, shit, who painted the place red? Then my foot went out from underneath me and I went down, splat, in a cold, vicious puddle. Scrambled back to my feet, wiping myself down, swearing. Wasn't until I saw the limp, shredded thing all over the bed and realized how the stuff dripping off me was blood that I punched the alarm and swore even harder. If only so's I wouldn't start screaming. The worst part was how I could still make out Mrs. Camp's scars on the torn remains of her skin, surrounded by a spill of deflating organs. They made weird channels for the blood leaking everywhere, guiding it into patterns on patterns on patterns, a whole new design. Doc Dawson had a couple of orderlies, came running, took over, set me aside to wait for the cops. I remember Dawson himself wrapping a blanket around my shoulders and saying quietly, "Sorry, Elaine, can't let you watch till the CSI says it's okay." Poor little nurse Sarah, who thought she could handle anything just 'cause she'd bagged upwards of 50 patients when the ventilators wouldn't give him enough oxygen, and gotten quick enough at slipping a bronchoscopy tube down the throat to clear the lungs of gunk. She just about tore out of the building, wailing. Never saw her again. And that one detective lady saying, "No one's saying you did this, Miss Mary May, though if you did have to remove all the bones from a body, you'd know how, right?" Not to mention the residents and the rest of the staff alike. Rubbernecking over the yellow tape like this was hands down the most interesting shit ever happened to them. Dawson drove me home. Afterwards, "I want to think about preparing for the worst, Elaine," he told me, at my door. "I mean, I'll do my absolute best to avoid the topic, but if the police happen to ask why I hired an uncertified ex-con on compassionate parole as a nurse, I'm going to have to tell them we had no idea you falsified your resume, so we're letting you go. You understand? Just can't afford to keep the home operating if we lose our liability insurance." So he knew the whole time, obviously. Asshole. "I get it," I said finally. "Thanks for that, Doc. Good night," and closed the door on him, right in his face. Then I took a hot shower, burned my scrubs in the sink, and passed out. Last thing I remember is wondering just what the fuck did happen to old Mrs. Camp's bones, let alone the rest of her.